Remember when childhood felt endless? When a single year seemed to stretch on forever? When summer felt like an entire lifetime, and your biggest responsibility was choosing which glitter nail polish to wear or deciding between the dolphin or unicorn Lisa Frank folder for school? Childhood used to be a slow season, a suspended world where time felt syrupy, soft, and untouched by the pressures of adulthood. But today, something feels different. Childhood seems to be shrinking. A 10-year-old now often looks, talks, and behaves more like a teenager from the early 2000s. And the culture that once adored, protected, and even romanticized childhood innocence is watching it dissolve in real time, replaced by something accelerated and startlingly complex. Generation Alpha, born between 2010 and 2025, is growing up in a world where childhood no longer unfolds at a gentle pace. Instead, adolescence seems to begin earlier, self-awareness arrives sooner, and identity becomes curated long before personality fully forms. They're aging faster, not in a biological sense, but culturally, socially, and emotionally. And the speed at which the shift is happening is impossible to ignore. We now see 10-year-olds with skincare routines more expensive than rent, 9-year-olds engaging in climate debates on TikTok, 11-year-olds worrying about aesthetic compatibility and personal branding, 12-year-olds describing themselves as burnt out. These aren't isolated phenomena. Together they point to something much larger, a transformation in what it means to be a child. It feels as though the childhood we remember, the messy, imaginative, unperformed kind, has been replaced by something hyper-aware, hyper-stylized, and hyper-modern. And the question everyone keeps asking is, why are kids aging so quickly now? What changed? And what does this acceleration mean for the future of youth? This video essay is a journey into that question, a cinematic exploration of how modern pressures, digital landscapes, and shifting cultural expectations are reshaping the timeline of growing up. But to truly understand why Gen Alpha appears to be maturing at a warp speed, we need to look backward as much as forward. Because accelerated childhood isn't entirely new. It has appeared throughout history, always during moments of social upheaval, economic instability, or rapid cultural transformation. So today we're peeling back the layers. We'll examine the blurring lines between childhood and adolescence, the digital acceleration of identity, the evolution of modern parenting, and the economic and social forces nudging children towards premature adulthood. And by the end, we'll ask the real question: is this a permanent evolution, or simply the newest chapter in the way society rewrites youth? Let's begin. And hello everyone, my name is Laura, and welcome back to my channel. Chapter 1, the blurring lines of childhood. There's a moment many adults describe when they encounter today's Gen Alpha kids. A moment of surprise, even quiet astonishment. It usually sounds like, wait, she's 10? She talks like she's 17. And it's not that these children are inherently more mature or precocious by nature, but rather that our collective expectations of what childhood should look and feel like have shifted dramatically. We are measuring Gen Alpha against a nostalgic memory of childhood that no longer exists. A model built on slow time, soft edges, and developmental innocence. To really understand this shift, it helps to revisit what childhood once looked like before the world accelerated. Think back to the 1990s. A 10-year-old in that decade lived in a world that felt contained and surprisingly analog. Their days were built around simple rituals, trading Pokemon cards at recess, racing home to catch Full House, wearing jelly sandals that left little flower imprints on the tops of their feet. They snapped photos on disposable cameras, not knowing how they would turn out. Sleepovers meant pizza, magazines, and giggling about crushes, not filming content or comparing skincare routines. Childhood had a distinct aesthetic, neon colors, scrunchies, sticker collections, and an even more distinct emotional tone. It was a self-contained ecosystem, separated from adulthood by thick boundaries and a kind of cultural insulation. Kid things and adult things lived on opposite sides of a clear line. Now compare that to a 10-year-old today. Their world feels expansive, borderless, and impossibly fast. They navigate smartphones and social platforms with the reflexive ease of breathing. Their humor is layered with irony, their references are global, and their language mimics older teenagers and influencers they've watched online. Where previous generations looked to siblings or classmates for cues on how to behave, Gen Alpha is raised under the gaze of the algorithm, absorbing styles, attitudes, and cultural norms from content meant for people twice their age. They live in a digital ecosystem that collapses age categories, placing children and adults on the same platforms, in the same feeds, in the same aesthetic currents. The result is a childhood that adults often struggle to recognize, aesthetically polished, socially fluent, emotionally complex, and laced with a kind of early self-consciousness. But is this truly rapid aging? Or is it the result of a society that has stopped making space for a long, slow childhood? It's important to remember that the idea of childhood as separate, protected, and innocent is not universal, or even particularly old. For most of human history, childhood was brief and utilitarian. In medieval Europe, children were viewed as little adults, expected to work, contribute, and behave with adult-like discipline. They wore miniature versions of adult clothing. They served apprenticeships, tended fields, and cared for siblings, and participated in family labor as soon as they were physically capable. There was no concept of a playful, imaginative childhood. That didn't emerge until centuries later. It wasn't until the Enlightenment, and then the Victorian era, that childhood began to take on the softer, more romantic qualities we associate with it today. Influential thinkers like Rousseau argued that children were born pure and needed to be shielded from the corruptions of adult society. This led to new ideas about child rearing, education, and emotional development. Victorian children, especially those in upper-class households, lived in carefully curated spheres of innocence, surrounded by moral tales, toys, nannies, and structured learning. Even then, this protected childhood was privilege of wealth. Working-class Victorian children still labored in factories and mines. But the cultural ideal was established. Childhood became something sacred, something worth preserving. Fast forward to the 20th century, and this ideal of childhood blossomed into a fully realized cultural identity. The post-war decades, particularly the 1950s through the 1990s, produced the longest, slowest childhoods in human history. They were the decades of schoolyards, bike rides, cartoons, Saturday morning cereal, and long stretches of boredom that felt endless in the moment. Children lived in a bubble of their own, emotionally, spatially, and socially. And adulthood felt far away. There was a sense of developmental sequencing. Childhood first, adolescence later, adulthood eventually, each phase separated by time and experience. But today, that bubble has burst. The protection that once surrounded childhood has evaporated. Instead, we're witnessing something reminiscent of the early industrial era. Not in the form of physical labor, but in the emotional and cognitive weight placed on children. Gen Alpha isn't working in factories, but they are absorbing adult anxieties at unprecedented levels. They scroll through climate predictions before they've learned long division. They witness geopolitical conflict long before they understand geography. They're exposed to economic uncertainty before they've taken a civics class. They absorb influencer lifestyles before they understand the difference between performance and authenticity. They experience algorithmic social hierarchies, likes, comments, beauty standards, virality before they fully grasp self-esteem. This exposure creates a kind of emotional compression. What's vanishing is what psychologists call middle childhood, the phase between ages 7 and 12, where kids once lived in a world of imagination and play, still protected from adolescent pressures. Middle childhood used to be the heart of what we think of as childhood, the era of tree houses, bike rides, art projects, imaginary games, and friendships that weren't yet complicated by self-consciousness. Now that stage is disappearing, children leapfrog directly from early childhood into preteen digital consciousness. They are physically young, but socially seasoned. Their interests, fears, and desires mirror those of much older peers. Their identities are shaped by global pop culture rather than local environments. Childhood has not ended, but has become shorter, more curated, and emotionally denser. And this blurring of childhood and adolescence raises an uncomfortable question. Who or what is compressing childhood? The instinctive answer is technology, but that's only one layer of the story. The digital world is not the sole cause, it's the vehicle. Underneath the screens, there are cultural forces, economic, social, parental, and psychological, that have converged to accelerate childhood in ways we're only beginning to understand. Technology didn't create this shift, it amplified it, accelerated it, and made it visible. To truly understand why Gen Alpha seems to be growing up at warp speed, we need to journey into the digital world that shapes them, the world they don't just inhabit, but are being shaped by in real time. Chapter 2, Digital Natives, Digital Pressures. Generation Alpha is the first cohort in human history to be born fully inside the algorithm. If Gen Z grew up online, Gen Alpha was raised by it, cradled in digital ecosystems long before they had the words to describe what they were seeing. For many of them, the glow of a screen has been present since infancy. Tablets were handed to toddlers not only as entertainment, but as tools of safety, convenience, and even necessity in a fast-paced world. But those glowing rectangles were never neutral. They came filled with infinite content, infinite comparisons, and infinite influences. The internet for this generation isn't a separate world you enter through a login screen. It's the background radiation of daily life, invisible, constant, and shaping them in ways previous generations could not fathom. They do not go online, they exist online. And when you exist online from such a young age, something fundamental happens. The boundary between childhood and adulthood collapses. Kids who grow up consuming adult content begin performing adulthood long before they emotionally or cognitively understand it. The performances they see, the get ready with me routines, aesthetic skincare setups, girl dinner memes, and morning productivity rituals of 20-somethings become templates for behavior. A child watching influencers talk about burnout, romantic dilemmas, diet culture, self-branding, and existential crisis isn't simply entertained. They're absorbing scripts for adulthood. And because the algorithm is designed to show more of what you watch, it keeps feeding them increasingly mature content, long before they are developmentally ready. This is the first generation where, chronologically, the growing up is out of order. They encounter the aesthetics, anxieties, and atmospheres of adult first, and then the actual emotional maturity later. In the 1990s, adult culture was heavily filtered. You had to sneak into PG-13 movies, borrow your older siblings' magazines, or eavesdrop on adult conversations. There were barriers, both literal and cultural, that kept adult knowledge at a distance. But Gen Alpha scrolls past adult fantasies, insecurities, and lifestyle aspirations at age 8, as casually as flipping a page in a picture book. There is no warning, no buffering, no gap. And with every swipe, they're absorbing models of how to look, behave, desire, and exist. What makes this even more intense is that children today are not just consumers, they're creators. Gen Alpha participates in an ecosystem that shapes them. Even young kids now understand aesthetics. They know the clean girl bedroom setup, the soft lighting of a TikTok haul, the angles that make a face more symmetrical. They know which filters smooth skin, which trends perform well, and how to speak to an invisible audience. Many of them know how to edit video, sync audio to lip sync sounds, and structure their day as content before they understand how to multiply fractions. This early brand awareness, this intuition for how one is perceived, creates a startling kind of self-consciousness that historically didn't emerge until adolescence. It also means they're growing up in a digital hall of mirrors. Historically, children were photographed only on special occasions, birthdays, holidays, school picture day, and most of those photos were awkward and endearing. Uneven bangs, missing teeth, mismatched outfits, crooked smiles. Childhood was documented occasionally, imperfectly, honestly, but Gen Alpha is photographed constantly. Many have digital footprints before they can walk. Parents post curated images of their children, matching outfits, perfect lighting, holiday aesthetics, and kids quickly learn how to pose, how to smile with eyes, how to look camera ready. Some become influencers before they learn multiplication. Even those without large online platforms internalize the idea that their lives should be aesthetically pleasing enough to share. This is childhood not as experience, but as performance. And yet, while this may feel surprisingly modern, it's not entirely new. There is a historical echo here, a strange but compelling parallel to the Renaissance, when noble children were painted as miniature adults. These portraits were not mere family keepsakes. They were symbols of lineage, wealth, and future promise. The children wore stiff brocade fabrics, elaborate lace collars, and posed with miniature pets or symbolic objects. They were children yet depicted as looking adult posture, adult expectations. Their images were curated not to reflect their real selves, but to project an idealized version of the family identity. Today's version of that portrait is digital. Instead of court painters, we have algorithm-driven platforms. Instead of aristocratic patronage, we have parental social media accounts. Instead of oil and canvas, we have filters and lenses. Gen Alpha's image is no longer static, it's dynamic, monitored, liked, commented on, and quantified. The difference, however, is profound. Renaissance children didn't know their portraits existed. They didn't see themselves as aesthetic objects, but Gen Alpha does. They grow up watching their own digital footprint form in real time, learning to see themselves through the eyes of viewers, friends, relatives, strangers, and algorithms. And when your identity becomes curated from birth, when your sense of self is tied to visibility and performance, you grow up faster, or at least on the surface. The pressure to appear a certain way online also creates a paradox. Children learn adult performances without adult understanding. They can replicate skincare routines without knowing why they feel insecure. They can mimic influencer confidence without understanding vulnerability. They can assemble an aesthetic bedroom without having developed personal taste. Childhood becomes more about imitation than exploration, about copying the polished surfaces of adulthood without the emotional scaffolding beneath it. There's another layer to this acceleration: access to global culture. In previous generations, children's worlds were shaped by their families, neighborhoods, and schools. Today, Gen Alpha is shaped by a global cultural stream. They absorb slang from British teens, fashion cues from Korean influencers, jokes from American comedians, and aesthetics from European lifestyle vloggers. Their identities are shaped by strangers across continents, and while this creates a beautifully diverse landscape of influencers, it also accelerates their maturity. Global content exposes them to complex social issues, large-scale anxieties, and adult realities long before their minds are ready to contextualize them. But the most significant pressures don't come from content. It comes from comparison. Gen Alpha is growing up in a world where everyone's life appears curated, glamorous, and effortless. They compare themselves not to classmates or siblings, but to global influencers and algorithmically selected ideal children. And when you compare your life to an aesthetic feed, childhood feels inadequate, too childish, too plain, so they begin to perform adulthood earlier, not out of desire, but out of pressure. Ultimately, Gen Alpha's rapid aging is not the result of early physical or intellectual development, it's the result of early aesthetic, emotional, and social exposure. They are growing up in a digital greenhouse, warm, bright, fast, where development is accelerated not by biology, but by culture. And to understand the next layer of this acceleration, we need to look at the people guiding them, their parents, who are navigating the same digital pressures while raising children inside them. Chapter 3. Parenting in the age of hyper-awareness. To understand why Generation Alpha seems to age so quickly, we have to look closely at the people raising them. Millennials and the oldest wave of Gen Z are parenting in a world unlike any previous era. They are navigating adulthood amid economic precarity, social polarization, global instability, and online dangers, surveillance culture, and relentless academic competition. These pressures don't just shape how they survive, they shape how they parent. Unlike the generations before them, they approach parenting with heightened vigilance, trauma awareness, and emotional literacy, all of which are well-intentioned, but ultimately accelerate childhood in unexpected ways. This shift towards what many scholars call proactive parenting emerges from a collective sense that the future is uncertain, fragile, and increasingly competitive. Skills that once belonged to teenage years, emotional regulation, digital literacy, personal boundaries, self-advocacy, are now woven into early childhood education. A 4-year-old today may know how to name their feelings, set boundaries with peers or identity red flags in social interactions. These are important tools, but they also come with an unintended side effect. They turn young children into mini therapists, constantly monitoring their own emotional states. When a child learns emotional vocabulary before they learn to ride a bike, it reshapes their inner world, making them hyper-aware of moods, tensions, and social cues. Children today are also coached early on safety, privacy, and personal autonomy. They learn about stranger danger, online etiquette, digital footprints, and consent at ages when previous generations were still learning how to tie their shoes. They are taught coping strategies, deep breathing, grounding exercises, mindfulness techniques, because their parents grew up in a world where mental health was ignored, stigmatized, or catastrophically misunderstood. Out of love, parents want to give their children the tools they never had, but in doing so, they introduce adult emotional framework into early childhood. This creates kids who can articulate boundaries with startling clarity, but who also carry adult-like anxieties before their nervous systems are fully developed. Contrast this with the way childhood was framed in the 1950s. Back then, children were encouraged to roam neighborhoods freely, climb trees, scrape their knees, and spend long afternoons unsupervised. Parents expected innocence, being naive, and even certain amounts of obliviousness. A child's world was small and defined by home, school, and local community. The world wasn't inherently safer, but it felt simpler because the children were exposed to adult stressors or adult-level information. Parents didn't discuss finances, mental health struggles, or global crises in front of their kids, not because the issues didn't exist, but because there was a cultural belief that children should be protected from them. Even during the Victorian era, parents were strict and they maintained a firm separation between adult concerns and childhood spaces. Middle-class and upper-class children lived in nurseries, often supervised by nannies and tutors. They were shielded from industrial horrors, family conflicts, and societal anxieties. Victorian parenting emphasized moral instruction and discipline, but it also created a clear divide. Childhood was its own world, insulated from adult reality. Children didn't overhear financial stress or political tension. They existed in curated innocence, even if that innocence was enforced. But for Gen Alpha, nothing is hidden. The walls that once separated childhood from adulthood had dissolved. Financial worries are discussed openly because millennial parents believe in transparency. Relationship struggles unfold in small homes where privacy is luxury. News about war, economic instability, and viral outbreaks streams constantly on screens that sit in living rooms, bathrooms, and bedrooms. Social media acts as an emotional amplifier, spreading worry, outrage, and fear with unprecedented speed. Children absorb this emotional climate through osmosis. Even when parents try to shield them, children pick up the tension, the hurried whispers, the exhausted sighs, the doom scrolling, the jokes about burnout. Children internalize what the adults feel around them. This creates a new kind of childhood, one marked not by external hardship, but by the eternal anticipation. Millennial parents want their kids to thrive, not simply survive, and this creates a paradox. They give children independence not because the world feels safe, but because it feels competitive. The narrative is no longer go outside and play. It's your child needs stimulation, your child needs enrichment, your child needs to build confidence, your child needs skills for the future. There's a constant low-level pressure to stay ahead. Parents sign kids up for language classes, STEM programs, mindfulness workshops, creative camps, tutoring, dance, sports, and coding, not because the children are demanding it, but because parents feel they must prepare them for a future that feels increasingly unforgiving. In this climate, kids learn self-regulation early. They learn to monitor their screen time, manage emotions, and navigate conflicts with maturity. They learn resilience, communication skills, and problem-solving strategies. All of this is helpful, but it also compresses childhood into an emotionally complex landscape where kids are expected to be competent before they have been carefree. What accelerates this even further is the rise of what psychologists call intensive parenting, the belief that a parent must be deeply involved, constantly guiding, supporting, and optimizing their child's development. Millennial parents became adults during an era of wellness trends, self-help culture, therapy, language, and productivity hacks. These frameworks shape how they raise their children. Therapy speak becomes household vocabulary, perfectionism becomes a parenting aesthetic, and emotional intelligence becomes a measure of success. But underneath all of this is something far more human: parental anxiety. Millennials came of age during recession, school shootings, rising inequality, digital transformation, and global uncertainty. Many carry unprocessed trauma, financial instability, or career precarity. Their anxiety, though often masked by preparation, leaks into the way they parent. Anxious parents don't always raise anxious children, but they often raise hyper-aware ones. And kids learn to read emotional micro-expressions, detect mood shifts, soothe adults, or preempt conflict. They become attuned to tension, responsibility, and expectations. They grow up faster, not because they want to, but because they feel that they have to. In a culture that demands preparedness, Gen Alpha is trained early to anticipate, plan, and perform. Childhood becomes less about exploration and more about regulation, less about imagination and more about interpretation, less about play and more about coping. And so, in a world where parents are hyper-aware, children become hyper-aware too. They grow up inside adult emotional climates rather than outside of them. They internalize adult frameworks before their brains are ready to hold them. And in the process, they become miniature adults long before adolescence begins. To understand the next layer of this rapid aging, we have to examine the broader forces that shape not just families but entire cultures. The economic and social pressures that define modern childhood. Chapter 4: Economic and Social Accelerators. Beyond digital immersion and hyper-attentive parenting, there is a larger, quieter force accelerating the aging of Generation Alpha: the economy. Children today are growing up in a world marked by a lot of instability and rapid technological change. These pressures form an invisible but ever-present backdrop to their daily lives. Even when parents don't explicitly discuss money or global events, kids absorb the emotional tone of the household, the stress of their parents' voices, the news headlines glimpsed over dinner, the sense that adulthood is not a distant horizon, but a looming threat they must prepare for. This environment mirrors historical moments when childhood tightened or collapsed altogether. During the Great Depression, children matured quickly because they had to. They understood scarcity, sacrifice, and the fragility of stability. Wartime children, especially those in Europe, grew up amid fear, rationing, and uncertainty, often taking on responsibilities far beyond their years. In the Victorian era, working-class children entered factories and coal mines at the age of 8 or 9, their childhood swallowed by necessity. But for Gen Alpha, the pressure isn't one of physical survival, it's psychological survival. Their burden is not literal labor, but anticipatory anxiety. This generation grows up listening to a new lexicon of worry. Messages like, you need to follow your passion, but also be practical. The job market is unstable. College might not be worth the cost anymore. AI is replacing everything. You have to stay competitive. Children internalize these contradictions, even if they don't fully understand them. They hear their parents debate rising rent, shrinking wages, or the impossibility of buying a home. They catch snippets of conversations about layoffs, burnout, economic bubbles, and global crises. And each whisper tightens the emotional landscape of their childhood. This creates a cultural identity built around preparedness. Children now think about careers at ages when previous generations were still learning how to read chapter books. What once belonged to teenage ambition, dreaming of future jobs, passions, or college paths, is now a conversation held in elementary school. A surprising number of children today have future careers mapped out, sometimes multiple backup options. They talked about side hustles, with the same casual tone kids in the 1990s used to talk about trading cards. They discuss content strategy, confidence, aesthetic branding, and productivity before puberty. The language of capitalism, ambition, optimization, and personal branding has seeped into childhood identity, and the world treats them accordingly. Children aren't framed as developing humans, they're framed as emerging adults in need of early skill building. Toys are marketed as educational tools. Television shows emphasize lessons, not imagination. Apps promise to teach coding, entrepreneurial thinking, emotional intelligence, and productivity habits. Even hobbies are subtly monetized. Kids are encouraged to turn crafts into Etsy shops, gaming into streaming careers, baking into content niches. The message is clear. Your childhood should prepare you for your future, not simply be lived in the present. Historically, childhood shrinks during periods of economic downturn or societal upheaval. Victorian factory work condensed childhood into brief flashes of play between long hours of labor. Depression-era children took pride in contributing for family survival. World War II children learned to thrift, responsibility, and emotional resilience earlier than expected. But today's version of accelerated maturity is less visible. It's not about physical work, but emotional and intellectual load. Gen Alpha is carrying an invisible backpack filled with adult fears, economic uncertainties, and existential anxieties. This psychological compression manifests in subtle but powerful ways. Children express worries about not being successful, not being smart enough, or not having talent. They fear falling behind before they've had a chance to begin. They feel responsible for ecological disasters they didn't cause, responsible for a digital world they can't control, responsible for securing a future that feels increasingly unstable. They experience an existential type of childhood, something previous generations rarely encountered before adulthood. Many Gen Alpha children express fears about natural disasters, animal extinctions, and environmental collapse. These concerns are not abstract. They appear in school curriculums, documentaries, and social media, and global youth movements. The emotional consequence is profound. They inherit a sense that the world is fragile and that their future is uncertain. Technological shifts add another layer. Kids are growing up amid automation, AI advancement, and job displacement. Even if they don't understand the nuances, they understand the fear in adult conversations. They absorb the idea that humans must constantly adapt, constantly innovate, constantly stay ahead to remain relevant. This cultivates a mindset of urgency, a feeling that childhood is not a protected period, but a countdown to competition. The result is an early seriousness in Gen Alpha, a quiet maturity that emerges from emotional osmosis. Children become careful, cautious, and perceptive. They develop adult-like awareness of schedules, routines, and expectations. They understand deadlines, performance, and achievement far earlier than necessary. This isn't maturity in the traditional sense, it's vigilance, and vigilance is heavy. When childhood becomes a preparation phase rather than a lived experience, kids grow up faster, not because they want to, but because the world demands it. This emotional acceleration doesn't age them physically, but it does age them psychologically. It weaves itself into their self-esteem, their identity, their worldview. It blurs the line between child and adult, placing them in a liminal space where innocence coexists with awareness and imagination coexists with responsibility. And when we combine these economic and cultural pressures with a digital landscape that compresses time, aestheticizes identity, and exposes children to adulthood prematurely, we arrive at the final transformation, a generation growing up at a warp speed in a world that seems to have lost the ability to slow down for them. Chapter 5, The Future of Youth and the New Paradigm. So what does all this mean? What does it tell us about the direction childhood is heading? And what the future holds for Generation Alpha? Are we witnessing the gradual erasure of childhood as we once knew it? The soft and unhurried season that so many of us remembered? Or is it what we're experiencing simply a temporary distortion, a cultural wobble caused by a world in rapid transition? The truth, as with most social shifts, is far more layered than a simple yes or no. Childhood is not disappearing, it is transforming, bending, reshaping, and recalibrating itself to fit the world it finds itself in. Children still laugh, they still play, and invent whole universes out of cardboard boxes or living room couches. They still dream with a kind of unfiltered serenity adults often forget. But those experiences now coexist with early self-awareness that previous generations were spared. A child today may spend the morning building a fort of a blanket and the afternoon worrying about whether their room decor is aesthetic enough for a TikTok video. They move fluidly between innocence and sophistication, imagination and self-consciousness, not because they want to, but because culture has given them no other choice. Gen Alpha's childhood is shorter, but also more adaptive. These children have grown up navigating digital ecosystems that previous generations entered only after adolescence. They are technologically fluent in ways that are astonishing, able to troubleshoot devices, understand online communities, and navigate complex platforms with casual ease. Their childhood is digitally rich but emotionally intricate. They have access to information, creativity tools, global conversations, and innovative learning environments, but those same tools expose them to pressures that adults themselves struggle to navigate. They are globally connected, but also visibly pressured. A child today can chat with peers from other countries, discover new interests in seconds, and access infinite creative resources. But they are also visible to friends, to strangers, to algorithms. Their identities are shaped not just by family and school, but by global aesthetic trends, viral moments, and invisible metrics of validation. It's not that they are losing innocence, it's that innocence now develops alongside awareness. Childhood is no longer a secluded garden, it's a glass house. The long-term effects of this transformation remain unknown. Some psychologists argue that Gen Alpha may grow into resilient, emotionally articulate adults with a strong sense of self-awareness and global consciousness. They may be better equipped to handle diversity, complexity, and ambiguity. Others worry that the emotional compression of childhood, the responsibility, the visibility, the early self-monitoring may lead them into adulthood carrying a sense of loss, feeling that they were always preparing for life but never quite living it. The reality probably falls somewhere in between. Humans adapt, children especially adapt. The question is not whether Gen Alpha will survive this transformation. They will, but what kind of adults they will become because of it. Will they look back on their childhoods with fondness, feeling empowered or connected? Or will they look back and feel as though the simple, playful parts of life slipped through their fingers before they had the chance to enjoy them? Will they grow into adults with heightened empathy, creativity, and global awareness? Or adults who are exhausted before they even begin? What we do know is that childhood has never been static. It has expanded and contracted throughout history, always shaped by the forces of its time. Industrialization shortened childhood, post-war prosperity lengthened it, the digital age blurred it, and now, in this era of accelerated information and intense cultural cross-pollination, childhood is reshaping once again. But throughout all these shifts, one thing has remained constant: the human need for innocence, joy, and unstructured time. No matter how much the world changes, children seek play. They seek wonder, they seek moments of slowness, softness, and imagination. And this is where the potential for a cultural correction emerges. Already we see early signs of desire to reclaim slow childhood. Movements encouraging outdoor play, digital minimalism, gentle parenting, and emotional spaciousness. Toys that once disappeared from shelves are returning. Families are seeking screen-free weekends. Schools are reconsidering workloads. Even children themselves are showing signs of longing for simpler, more tactile experiences, crafts, nature puzzles, offline play. Culture may be accelerating, but human beings still hunger for depth, meaning, and connection, and children feel that hunger even more strongly. The real question is whether society will allow Gen Alpha to experience childhood fully, or whether we will continue to treat them as emerging adults, responsible for navigating a world they did not create. Will we slow down school schedules, reduce digital intrusion, protect their inner worlds? Or will we continue to ask them to perform adulthood emotionally and aesthetically before they are ready? The future of youth depends on whether we choose to slow down with them, whether we make room for daydreaming, whether we respect childhood as a season of life, not a training period, whether we allow kids to be messy, imperfect, and unproductive and uncurated, whether we choose presence over performance. Because childhood doesn't simply vanish, it responds and it adapts. But it also needs space, emotional, physical, and psychological, to truly flourish. And the question facing us now is simple yet profound. Will we create the space for Generation Alpha? Or will we continue to rush them towards a future they've barely had time to imagine? The answer will shape not just Gen Alpha's destiny, but the future of youth itself. And thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments below. This all kind of started with Northwest Makeover, and then just like seeing Gen Alpha online, they like are doing things that people in their early 20s do. And I do feel grateful that I grew up in a time like pre-internet, just playing vintage Super Mario, and I don't know, I'm happy for it now. I just can't imagine what it would be like coming of age in this world. It's just so different. And I do look back at the innocence of just riding my bike, those endless summer days. It was just such a different world, and I do appreciate it. So let me know in the comments below your thoughts on all this. Are you disturbed by the way things are going with Gen Alpha and the future generations because of technology and AI? Anyways, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.